Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Today we're looking at the recent local elections in Turkey, which were dominated by allegations of corruption aimed at the ruling AK party and its leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan. His party secured 45% of the vote. The main opposition, the Republican People's Party, gained around 30%, while the Nationalist Movement Party managed to get just over 15%. A referendum on Erdogan was what some termed the local elections. And if it was a referendum, then Erdogan has certainly passed with flying colours, fighting off allegations of sleaze and misconduct. But some people fear that the victory could deal a blow to democracy if the Turkish Prime Minister now continues to clamp down on social media and websites, which he sees as dangerous to him and those around him. Erdogan even turned on his opponents in his victory speech, labelling them enemies and warning that they would pay the price. So in light of these recent events, we ask, why is the AKP so popular in Turkey? And what next for their opponents, especially the exiled cleric Muhammed Fethullah Gülen, who has been singled out by Erdogan? And how will the attacks on social media and websites affect freedom of speech in Turkey? Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this are Hakan Çamuz, chairman of Musiad UK, Turkey's independent industrialists and businessmen's association, Nesrin Fehmi, founder and editor of the North London-based Turkish language newspaper Olé, and on the line by Skype from Istanbul is Andrew Gardner, who's Amnesty International's researcher on Turkey. But first, let's take a look at this report.
After all the controversy and accusations, there was one clear winner on the election night in Turkey. After the final local election results were declared, the ruling Justice and Development Party, or AKP, was found to have improved upon its 2009 result. Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan wasted no time in declaring that he had won a victory over those who had opposed him in recent months.
From tomorrow, there may be some who flee. There are some who have already fled. I have personally filed legal complaints against some of them. I warned that they could flee. We will enter their lair. They will pay for this. They will pay the price.
For Erdogan, this was a personal vindication. After months of controversy, stemming from a string of embarrassing accusations of sleaze and corruption, and a number of damaging leaks online, culminating in the release on YouTube 4 days ago of an audio recording between government officials discussing the Syrian crisis. To Erdogan, the leak was the latest affront to his rule.
How can you breach our national security in Syria? Syria is at war with us.
In response to these leaks, Erdogan has purged many members of the Turkish judiciary and blocked access to social media websites like Twitter. However, experts say that there's little that the governments can do to stop the information spreading in this way.
The claim of national security can be made, but it's weak at best. If information gets out, then it's out. And the idea of it being a threat to someone is it's all kind of relative, and so I think it's a question of national security. Maybe it's a valid point, but I think in the end, citizens will do what they want with the information.
Erdogan has gained a strong following in Turkey, running on an anti-elite, anti-corruption platform, which formed the base of his first election victory in 2002, building a winning coalition of working-class and religious voters. The result of these elections shows that, despite all the accusations of corruption thrown at Erdogan and his ruling AKP, that coalition is still intact. For members of the Turkish public, the result seems something of a foregone conclusion.
I believed they would win, but AK Party increased their votes because of the opposition's mistakes.
Following the election results, the main opposition CHP claimed to be a victim of electoral fraud, highlighting in particular the result in the capital, Ankara, where the party was narrowly beaten by the AKP. The local elections marked the beginning of a crucial 15-month election cycle, with presidential elections this year and parliamentary elections in 2015. Following this result, the opposition appears divided and fragmented, and the question now appears to be whether Erdogan runs for a fourth term next year, something that will require a change to the AKP's constitution. One prominent journalist believes that Erdogan will approach these elections in the same way.
So Erdogan will not reconcile. Erdogan will continue to fight against his opponents in political circles, and he will try to consolidate his 50% of votes until presidential elections.
Nathaniel Sansom, Islam Channel.
Well, Hakan, let me come to you. First of all, why did the AK party do so well in spite of all these allegations?
To be honest with you, this is not really surprising for AK Party people, because they do have a very popular base in Turkey, and most of the conservative section of Turkish voters, as well as those who actually are quite happy with the success of the AK Party in the last over 11 years of being in government, would support the party naturally. And from what I understand, they never had doubt about the success they would get. And last local election, they had about 38% of the voting, and this election is 45%. That's an increase of 7%. And in local election terms, that's a lot of numbers, because when the way they reflect it, if there was a general election now, you would double the difference, and they would probably end up being 55% of the popular vote in Turkey, as it stands. That's how they politically calculate things. So it's a popular voting base in Turkey.
But these corruption allegations were quite strong, and they were based on leaked tape recordings, most of which appeared to be quite genuine. Aren't people worried about corruption?
You know what it is? The genuineness of it is still in doubt. Corruption will be tackled, must be tackled, whether it's within AK Party, within this government, or at any part of any structure of the system. It needs to be tackled, and I believe it will be tackled. What was based as allegation wasn't really based on evidence. It was just illegal recordings of discussions with people and whatnot, and none of them really actually count as an evidence of corruption at government level, which is what people don't distinguish in the news media or print media and whatnot. Corruption, by definition, isn't what we had in Turkey. They had illegal recordings of discussion among some people, but there's no hard evidence. All those people that was arrested, only 3 of them are still being prosecuted by the prosecutors, and none of them are government officials. This is not a government corruption we're talking about here. Illegal activities there may be, and it needs to be processed. Due process has to take place within the legal framework. Let that happen. We will see if there's corruption. We will account these people to it. The Turkey voters will account the government to it. Yet there is no evidence. Yet this is allegation. Everything's based on hearsays on Twitters and YouTube recordings. That's not evidence. We are living in a country where a democratic government is in place and rule of law prevails. So we've got to take these standards as standards.
Let me just turn to Andrew Gardner. You're in Istanbul at the moment. I mean, the other allegations that were made in the immediate aftermath of the election was that there had been some sort of fraud in the counting. I mean, are people taking that seriously as a major problem?
Well, I think this is one of the issues which people are discussing here. I mean, I would agree with your earlier, what he said, that there's a strong base, a strong level of support for the governing party here. I think what's also important to note is that the government, through the years it's remained in power, it's got very strong links with business, and it's secured the support of business. The mainstream media is very cowed in Turkey, and large swathes of it basically roll out the government line. So this is very important for the government in maintaining its support. Also on the corruption allegations, there was a survey undertaken which showed about 73% of the people in Turkey believe that the corruption allegations against officials within the government and business leaders close to them are correct. But despite these things, obviously a substantial number of these people are still voting for the government. So there are lots of these things which are very polarized. The corruption allegations is one. The allegations, which I haven't seen substantial, credible allegations of in terms of voting fraud, but these arguments are going to go on and on. But I mean, obviously in democracy, elections are important, but also the behavior of government and the behavior of the party in terms of respecting the rights of opposing beliefs is also very important. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the lead up to the election in particular, and in the last few years as a whole, is that the governing party haven't respected these opposing beliefs, haven't respected their rights to speak out, and have been fairly ruthless in opposing them, and in some senses even crushing these beliefs.
Well, Nassim Fehmi, let me turn to you. I mean, how do you explain that paradox that Andrew's touched on, that 73% of people allegedly believe there is corruption at the top level, and yet they vote for the ruling party? How does that get explained?
The way I look at it is parties before AKP and Erdogan in the history of our democracy has not achieved economically and some social issues as much as Erdogan. For example, the NHS, infrastructure, business and investment. So obviously, on one side, you have the religious, let's say, I believe that majority of Turkey is Muslim anyway, but there are those who accept secularism and there are those who wants more Islamic rule. So Erdogan has as our guest said earlier, has a very strong base as far as he's using the religious card, which he's got a base of supporters. Add to that the people who look around and say that no other political party in Turkey will stabilize the market, economics, and financially we're not going to be well off with any other party, or whether it's municipal elections or general elections. That's number two. And number three is that people are used to all these corruption allegations anyway, even well before Erdogan. So no one is going to turn and say that any other party who's going to be in power is not going to get involved locally, nationally, into this kind of corruption allegations. So public are used to it. As long as at the end of the day they have a free NHS, as long as the business is normal, there's money in circulation, that's what they care for. So they're used to seeing so many corruption cases in the past anyway. So there's no difference on that line. At least the advantage now is there's only one party in power, and Erdogan is controlling everything, whereas you don't have different businessmen close to the government or different politicians who are involved in different type of corruptions. There's only one man, there's only one boss, and he dictates everything. It's better for the country, as far as they're concerned.
Can I just say something about what Andrew said about this poll he's talking about? Andrew is talking as if it's like me saying, Andrew, in Iran there was a poll conducted about Amnesty International, and 70% of Iranians hate Amnesty International. Or in North Korea, for example, people hate Amnesty International, and that's a valid point. And that's how Andrew is talking about it, as if this is some kind of valid, credible numbers. It isn't. Who's done the polling? Who's done this market research about it? This is just it's just sentence that he's talking about. If that was the case, how is it that nearly 26 million people voted for this party? So he's reading something from something he read in Turkey that was done by we don't know who. It's not the real number. 70% of the population in Turkey do not believe this government is corrupted. That's just a sentence Andrew is saying. It isn't a reality of it.
No, but I think Nesrin was saying that people do accept there's corruption, but they don't mind
corruption
in the sense that there's always been corruption, so nothing special about Erdogan.
This is a tradition that comes in Turkish politics. We know corruption exists in every government. We know this. Whether you prove it and then you somehow cover it up, that is not acceptable by anybody's standards
Can
here.
I say something?
Well, I just want to bring Andrew in because I think...
I want to add something to this point, is that what I would have expected, and maybe many people would have expected, the Prime Minister, doesn't matter if it's true or not, if there are such allegations, serious allegations, he should be coming out first, saying that he's going to look into it and investigate it. Because these are serious allegations. So whether it's true or not, it's his job to make sure the judiciary works and find out whether these allegations are right or wrong.
But that's what he said. He did say let judiciary process take place. I mean, what else can the Prime Minister do? You can't expect Prime Minister of either this country or Turkey to intervene in the process, which is what the process is still going on.
Well, please let me just bring in Andrew, because I think he's having problems with Skype, may not be able to stay with us for too long. Andrew, do you want to respond to the point about the polling? The other point I wanted to get you to talk about, if you wouldn't mind, is Gezi Park. I mean, you're right in Istanbul, where Gezi Park is. Do you think the Gezi Park people feel very disappointed now that Erdogan's come back in spite of the protests, and that do they fear that he will now try once again to tear down the trees and put up that shopping mall that caused all the problem last year?
I think the important thing, as Hakan says, is not the opinion polls regarding the corruption allegations. Also, as Harkin says, it's a very important case. In fact, I would say it's a test case for not just for these important allegations of corruption, but also the rule of law in Turkey. But all that we've seen so far leads to the unfortunate conclusion that there will not be an effective investigation in this case. What's happened after the arrest took place on the 17th of December was that the police officer investigating the case were taken off. The procedures around investigation of public officials were changed, that the prosecutors investigating the case were taken off. And then we saw a major change for the structure of the judiciary, which put the judiciary as a whole under far greater executive power. So what we can see so far is, of course, the judiciary should investigate this. It's of incredible importance that they do so. But the government has taken virtually every step in its power to stop these investigations being carried out. And I think that's a very damning indictment on the government in power. Regarding the Gezi Park protests, I think it's important to note that the protesters, they came from a very great range of different political backgrounds. They didn't support one party. So it's not something which you can directly link to the elections. I think the concerns of people who were protesting last summer and have been protesting since, and also other opposing voices in the media and in civil society is that the tone that the Prime Minister has taken, the very quite sectarian rhetoric that he's used in the election, and also the speech he made after that, to take steps against his enemies. Given what we've seen recently in Turkey, that's a very a threat that should be taken seriously, and it could unfortunately mean that the rights of opposing voices, dissident voices to speak out will be curtailed, and further very authoritarian steps in violation of the right to freedom of expression will be taken. That's what our concern is as Amnesty International today.
Well, Hakan, what about the Gulen movement? Have they reached their peak? Will they now be dismantled by Erdogan?
I mean, most of the people that Andrew's talking about that, somehow uprooted from their position were the officials that was somehow got into the position through their connection with the Gulen movement.
Well, that's why I'm asking you about it.
And that's why they were uprooted from their position, because of the abuse of power, Andrew, abuse of power. And what Andrew is saying is that we shouldn't trust the new appointed prosecutors who have been then placed into their position because somehow they lost their independence. Because the way he's alleging is the new prosecutors who are continue the legal process now should not be trusted, according to his theory, which is not correct. Those who are actually there and abusing their power because they belong to a certain clique or certain followers of certain individual, and abusing their power to the benefit of where they belong to in the government position, and because they are uprooted from their position because of the abuse, is the right thing to do. And as far as the Gulen movement is concerned, what they tried to do, i.e. taking over positions in government and somehow use those positions, is not accepted by Turkish state. You can't allow...
Yeah, but what does Erdogan mean when he says they're going to pay the price?
What
does that mean?
Paying of the price is basically anybody who seems to use their position to benefit of others rather than what they're supposed to do, they will not be continuing in their positions as a government officials. You can't be in government official and simply just do what you're supposed to do for benefits of others. You've got to be, if you're a prosecutor, for example, public prosecutor, if you are a judge, if you are working in the high courts and what, which is where they're mainly based, you can't use and abuse your position, and that's what he will stop. That's what he means. He doesn't mean anything else. I don't know why Andrew should not be worried about Turkey. Turkey is a big state, Andrew, and believe me, they'll know how to deal with these things, and it doesn't mean there's going to be bloodshed. Or
well, let's just
I think you're exaggerating it over there.
Andrew, what is your view on the Gulen movement? Have they been abusing their power?
Well, I think if there is credible evidence that public officials have been abusing their power, then they have to face disciplinary investigations, or if there's evidence of crimes, then they have to be investigated by the judiciary. I don't think you can say that police officers who are investigating government corruption should be taken from their positions wholesale thousands of transfers of positions across Turkey. I mean, the only thing which we know that they've been doing is investigating government corruption. So I don't understand how this can be an abuse. This is something which is a fundamental duty, and unfortunately, investigations into the abuses of public officials is something that has really been lacking from Turkey, which has resulted in these persistent allegations of corruption, human rights abuses by police officers and others, which up until today haven't really been effectively investigated. So, I mean, there's a real problem of impunity in Turkey, which has not been addressed up till today.
I'm sorry to cut you.
I don't think that.
Look, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're running out of time. We'll deal with that impunity issue in the second half of the programme when we also talk about the wider civil liberties thing, but also look at whether Erdogan will now try to become president. So stay with us.